Welcome everybody to Defender Fridays. As usual, here's my pitch for Defender Fridays. So we're a bunch of people from Lima Charlie. We get to talk to all kinds of people in the industry that are super interesting, doing different things on the defensive side, particularly. And so we just want to bring in people that have different perspectives to the defensive side of cybersecurity and just have a chat with them. So this is not a slides lecture at all. Kind of the opposite. So we're just looking to have a discussion about a topic that our guests are, is near to their heart and they really know about. So today we have Rajan Kapoor. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's Rajan. You're very close. Yeah,
Rajan.
Rajan. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. With us. So welcome. How are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited. This has been something I've been looking forward to all week. So super excited to be here and have this chat today.
Awesome. That's great. That's great. Yeah, it makes all the difference to talk about a topic that you know a lot about and that you really kind of care about, right? So that's great. Do you want to maybe do a quick intro about yourself and what you
Yeah, for
want to talk
sure.
about?
So yeah, Rajan Kapoor. I am currently at a company called Material Security, which is a very small cybersecurity startup here in San Francisco. And I'm my title right now is Field CISO, which means I'm not a practitioner right now. I'm just out in the world talking to people and having conversations like this. I was a very early employee here, and I've done pretty much you name it, I've probably done it here. Before this, I spent most of my career in IT and security. Most recently, right before security, I was a director of security at Dropbox, and just a number of other companies before that. I've you all are my people, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um, yeah, I have grown up with the IT industry as it evolved into or split into a cybersecurity industry. When I first started, everything was on-prem. The internet was just becoming something that companies leveraged. A firewall was good enough, and that changed very quickly. And so as things started to move in a direction of well, we need to actually protect our infrastructure in very different ways. We need to protect our employees in very different ways. Got to ride along with that and got to see the evolution of the industry. So that's me.
Awesome, awesome. And I've been thinking about that topic because that you want to come in and talk about. So you put in a couple of words. I think it's kind of comparing workspace. Is that the word?
Like
Yeah,
cloud workspace, like your
workspace.
cloud office environment. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, right, right. And so, as for my background is EDR, like pretty thoroughly. So I've always thought about what you describe as like this kind of mapping between EDR and kind of like this cloud-based side of things. But I don't know enough. I don't know enough about it to actually, be taken seriously. So I'm very curious to kind of get your pitch for what the difference is and why that mapping makes sense and how you think about it.
Yeah, for sure. This is something that is really, really close to and near and dear to my heart. We if we look at the industry today, you start with endpoints, right? And the evolution of EDR, right? When I first started my career, you had antivirus, running on an endpoint, and you had, signature-based detections looking for bad stuff happening. Eventually, we rolled out endpoint firewalls because we're like, okay, let's monitor the network traffic as well. And then we started to do things like write our own detections. We started to really try and understand what was happening with the processes that were running on the environment with on the endpoint, just different behaviors that we were looking for. And what happened was that we very quickly ended up in a bunch of different tools, some that were homegrown, some that were deployed, and it became really hard to manage endpoints, and it became really hard to understand what was happening with them all in one place. And then all of a sudden, you have a company like CrowdStrike pop up and say, "Hey, this really doesn't make sense anymore. Like, why aren't we doing this all in one place?" Right? And but that's not the only part of the industry that we saw this, and you also see it with the whizzes of the world, right? If you think about cloud posture management and cloud workload management, when AWS was first a thing, we would go and like look at permissions. We would go and like look at like config, and we would then just try and look for weird things happening like with resources in the environment, and that's how we figure out something weird was something bad was happening. Eventually, you had like posture management and you had workload management that would try and like help you with vulnerability detection and remediation. But again, you started to see this bifurcation of tooling, right? And you started again to have to write like your own detections, and you're jumping between different surfaces to try and understand what's happening with your environment. And then Wiz comes along and they're like, this really makes no sense. Like, let's just do this all in one place, right? Um, so this is an evolution that happens in the industry, but it hasn't happened for like the cloud workspace yet. It hasn't happened for Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace yet. Today, you still have a number of different services that people are running to try and protect their these environments. And the first question is like, well, yeah, but does it matter? Like, are these things even important enough to protect? And if you look at even like the MITRE framework, they have their very own framework for the Office suite, right? They are telling us that this thing is important enough, right? Um, and if you think about what's in there, you have your identity, right? Like whether it's Active Directory or Google Directory. You have your corporate content, right? You have files, you have emails, you have all of this sensitive data that's being generated. It's like the one SaaS service that like all of your employees use, right? And then you have basically you have just like the way you collaborate with your customers, your vendors. Like email, unfortunately, is still the number one collaboration tool in the world. So you have an attack vector, you have a data repository, you have just a bunch of stuff that's really attractive to attackers, right? And so that's what I mean by these things are very important, but we haven't yet given them the attention or the tooling that helps people protect those services the way they should be, like critical infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an analogy to like your classic on-prem. And in the on-prem world, we know when people log in, we know about lateral movement, we know about persistence, we know about multiple logon sessions. And then you start talking about, well, what about just like the cloud logon? What about device codes on Microsoft 365? What about attempted data exfiltration, like is now built into OneDrive since they added the public or personal and corporate side. And we just don't have a whole lot of visibility there. And attacks, like breaches from start to finish, don't have to involve shells on internal machines. That's a little terrifying to those who are thinking of the classic on-prem world. Not intentionally calling out Maxime there, but
Yeah. Yeah, you think about
Go
like
for it.
what people are using today, right? They'll have some sort of SaaS posture management tool to tell them that their posture is okay. They'll have some sort of DLP service to tell them that what data is in there and what's happening with it, right? There'll be like just like these like different services that people are going to. And when I was at Dropbox, we wrote a whole bunch of detections ourselves for our like Google Workspace environment because it just like there wasn't a lot that out of the box, and there wasn't a lot in Google's UI, right? And you start to exist like in your SIM, you're existing in your posture management service, you're existing in your DLP service, and a breach happens, right? And like you're just like, ah, I've got like five different tools I need to go look at now, and try and figure out what's happening here. And you ask people what like Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 like security is, 9 out of 10 times people will tell you, well, it's just inbound email threat detection, like just put up a email detection engine and we're good.
So what? This may be a very naive question. Again, I'm the endpoint guy. But what's the fundamental difference between, you kind of started by describing like, hey, we do these security, this shift in security in like AWS, and you talked about SaaS. In my mind, in my naive mind, Workspace is kind of just a rough equivalent to AWS security. Is the difference a technological difference, or is it a conceptual difference in how those tools are used that we can't take that same approach from one to the other?
Yeah, there's some overlap. However, you have like with your production environment, with your AWS environment, you have you can kind of control that a bit more, right? Like you have your engineers like standing up an application. you know what should be running on that, that cloud infrastructure. You have a few people who are responsible for like, maintaining it, managing it. The detections you can build there assume somewhat a controlled environment. It's chaos over in Google Workspace. Like it's all of your employees doing stuff, right? So like you kind of like it's very hard then to like start to identify when something bad might be happening because your finance team is doing something very different with data than your engineering team is, and then even like this concept of like baselining like end user behavior, like that's something you kind of have to do because that's how you can detect deviations from the norm, right? And so you're no longer like with the cloud workspace and or sorry, cloud workloads, you want to baseline what your application should be doing or what what your infrastructure should be doing. You're not necessarily baselining like how it's being consumed, that's not entirely true. In some cases you are, but like if you're a big, like SaaS service provider, like your end users are going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff, right? You need to just make sure your infrastructure looks healthy. And but on the cloud workspace side, like it is just kind of chaos with employees, right? They're like the chaos monkeys of our organizations.
Yeah, that's interesting because it as you begin, it's the same mapping as talking about production security versus kind of the general population endpoint security, right? You think things are clean, but then you actually go and deploy in the real world, and it turns out it's a huge mess. So uh, how do you then approach this concept of like endpoint, well, not endpoint in this case, workspace detection and response? Like, is there a common framework to how we think about endpoint? Is there even a framework at all to how we think about it?
Yeah, I mean that answer is actually, fortunately, very easy for me to answer or to give you. MITRE's already done the work for us, right? And they will talk about, how there's basically like initial access, how there's lateral movement. I don't know, do we do screen shares here? Should I pull up their framework, or is it easy to just like talk to it? Let me pull that up. I think it really drives home kind of what I'm trying to you know speak to here, which is let me see, where is it? I think I have a bookmark. Yeah, here we go. So let me share my screen,
If you may need
and
to give them
share is
permissions,
not turned on.
Vincent.
All right, I might need to get the permission to turn that. But while we're getting this permission, but basically, MITRE has infrastructure frameworks, they have software frameworks, and they have one specifically for the Office suite, they call it. And you can see like they start, the basically like initial access is like phishing. But then you have to move, like look for lateral movement, you have to look for data exfiltration, there's a whole bunch of other things they want you to look for. And if we just build against that framework, like good things will happen. That's yeah, it's a great question though. Like, what do we how do we organize our thinking around this?
Right. So that's the thinking uh, from like the bad things happening perspective. At a technical level, how do you kind of engineer a workspace detection and response, set up around that? Is it just like a frame of mind to how you put your SIM to making detections in there, or is there a different?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of this, right? There are what I call like universal detections that look for basically like, do we see novel logins? Do we see like MFA factors changing? Do we see like, you basically want to um, look for the possibility that something bad happened to an account, and then look for like indicators that the bad thing is actually happening. So like you want to look for like user clicked on a phishing link before it was detected as a bad email, and now by the way, they didn't have like MFA resistant or sorry, phishing resistant MFA in place, and now we're seeing a novel login. Now we're seeing a new MFA factor, right? And it's but these are all things that like we've been doing ourselves as detection response teams. We've just been building these detections, and so it's just like, well, if you I spoke to someone, and he was talking about how like every time he joins a new company, he spends 6 months in their sim writing the same detections he wrote at his last company, right? Why isn't that a product? Right? Like, why don't we just take those universal detections, put them into one product, and then let your security team focus on the stuff that actually matters and is specific to your company, right? Um, I have a friend over at Headway, Frank Wang, and he's like, look, I want to focus. Headway is a helps helps people get access to mental health care, helps them like just do a whole bunch of things that are around really sensitive and really personal activities. And he's like, I want to just focus on like securing this patient data. That's what I want to focus on. I don't really want to focus on like securing Google Workspace because I'm just doing the same things over and over again. And I think to answer your question, I think a bit more directly is the way I would think about this is the kind of approach I would take is like um, detect like a bad thing happening or could be happening, but you want to, as much as possible, automate your remediation, automate your reaction to it, to like just kind of like err on the side of being very careful. And that's the piece that's really, really, really missing today. That's the hardest thing to instrument is like that automatic like reaction to something bad might be happening.
Got it, got it. So it sounds like a big part of this is expert knowledge. So again, right, not my space, but like it feels like a lot of it is expert knowledge applied to a lot of APIs, right? From the different workspace providers. So interpreting that. And then I'm assuming then the response is also, you could kind of squint and say like, it's kind of like SOAR, but just really, really hyper specialized for these sets of APIs, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think the SOAR metaphor, like it works to a point where because like like you are trying to orchestrate a response for sure. You're trying to, but I think that like it's almost even more simple than that. Like, and I'll explain why I'm saying that. Google is solid. Like their workspace infrastructure is solid. They learned a lot of lessons when they got popped a few years ago, and they are a consumer-facing service with Gmail. Like they've had to make their infrastructure solid. They don't give us as Google Workspace admins a lot to work with in their UI. In fact, like their UI is just it's I feel like I'm fighting it sometimes, right? Like I'm just like let me get done what I'm trying to get done here. However, if you learn, to your point, how to work with Google's APIs, you unlock a whole bunch of superpowers. There is so much you can do, and what I mean by what I said, like it's even simpler than a SOAR. Google will do things like tell you when they think a nation state is targeting one of your like accounts. They will just straight up tell you they have a black box that they're looking that they have all the, and they're pretty good at detecting this stuff, but they don't do anything to help you with it, right? They're just like, hey, like this thing's happening, this bad thing is happening. Here's we've logged something in Security Center. Good luck, right? And so like you don't even have to like with a SOAR, you're just like, hey, when do I start to take action? I need to like I need to like get that trigger first and then go take action. So I guess the analogy here is more like, yeah, the reactive part of a SOAR, like actually like getting the thing done is important. That's the thing we have to work on and thing that needs to be solved. But like just knowing when you need to do something, Google does that for us. They just don't do it in a way that's easy to consume.
That's cool. That's cool. It sounds like in some ways it's kind of the mirror of the story of around endpoint security, where endpoint security, the response side was always fairly straightforward in the sense that, if you think mitigation on an endpoint, what can you do? Well, I can kill a process, I can delete a file, there's like five, I don't know.
I
But
mean, you could
then
adequately scope the compromise before you start the remediation process, which is like tale old as time of I played whack-a-mole on the one bad, but it turns out there were three other bads in the environment.
exactly,
Right.
and a lot I think of the opaque magic around early endpoint was around the detection side of things. I'm going to hook this and that and look at this really complicated token thing in memory.
Mhm.
Whereas I sort of get the feeling that when you look at it from a workspace perspective, no, it's like the detection side of things. Like there's expert knowledge, but it's it comes to you as a well formatted like stream of JSON, right? It's the response side where you really have to be very well accustomed to like exactly the inside concept of how those work to remediate maybe.
100%. And like with EDR, you're looking at the behavior of the endpoint, right? You're looking at what's happening with a specific process. You're like what resources, like what network traffic you're seeing, things like that, right? With cloud workspace, you're looking at the behavior of the account, right? Like you're not looking at the process necessarily, but you're looking for like these toxic combinations of things happening that tell you that something bad is likely happening here. And it's kind of the same thing that to Jeff's point, like you could just like lock an account out every time you see something suspicious. But I think your CEO might get a little upset, right, that happened, right? Um, but let's understand what we have to do. Is it that we just have to kill some sessions, like get rid of the MFA factor that was just added, right? And then allow the rotate a password and send it to the end user, and then they can get back in and with a little bit of a hiccup, but they're not completely like locked out of their environment.
I think too commonly with that type of response, whether it's on-prem SIM or not, people hesitate because who we are. They hesitate to reach for the phone, like call an authoritative number for that user. And did you just log in from Bangalore? Did you just
Right.
add a new device code from a new device entirely? Like getting to some ground truth pretty early helps as well. Though in some fast-moving scenarios, you absolutely have to do exactly as you said. Let's lock it out, let's reset the password, and let's go through the process. And I'll get on a soapbox briefly about war game your processes. I've had too many times of hearing about, maybe not doing incident response for, somebody calls in and like, hey, I got a new phone, need to add it. And apparently you just need a name for that. Okay, now I need to reset my MFA and use the new phone number that I just gave you on this same call to do so.
Right. Exactly. Right. And then even then, it's like, how do you get to like a high degree of confidence? Like you think you've like validated, you think you're making the right decision, but like you still like don't necessarily know. Right. And that's where like being able to like profile behavior of the account becomes really important because you can almost use those profile heuristics to make sure that once the account gets reactivated, like what are we seeing here? Does it look like it's gone back to what it normally does, right? But if you're not building those profiles to begin with, if you're not getting that context to begin with, you're kind of just like, I've done as much as I can here to verify that this is the thing I should be doing. I'm gonna turn everything back on, but unless my detections start to hit again, I'm gonna assume everything's okay.
You mentioned something there that I think is not part of incident responses that really should of, hey, post remediation, let's monitor the accounts involved and make sure that they go back to normal, as opposed to, no, the fire's out. Now I'm going
Yep.
to turn my back to it and make sure, and if it catches back up, well, that's a new incident, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Double check.
And then there's also like the post breach side of this where you want to understand like what the impact was, like what data may have been like exfiltrated, like what, and that's super hard with the tooling that we have today. That's stuff that you have to be ingesting a stream from like Google Workspace in order to go look back at that data later on.
I feel like the historically, like on the endpoint side, over time we kind of learned in the industry, like culturally, a lot of like, sort of best practices and ways to think about it, and ways to like detect some of these things. Is there an equivalent in the workspace side of things? Like I'm sure there's some Sigma rules somewhere that kind of match somebody's sim somewhere, but like is there a community or something like that that kind of helps drive this cultural knowledge?
Yeah, I think primarily you would talk to like CorpSec detection and response teams today, and they've been through a bunch of battles. They understand like what to look for. It's a good question. Like really, where is the innovation being driven for like cloud workspace? Detection response. But I think that's part of the challenge here is we have all these like siloed organizations like solving the problems themselves instead of just coming together. And that becomes easier when you have like a platform to do it off of, right? When you have everything kind of brought together, because the silos that you see today is you'll have like your email threat detection team, like looking at email and all they care about is email, right? Then you have like your, maybe your CorpSec team that's focused on like account security and identity. And all they're looking at is like identity and all their detections are written around identity. Then you have like your data security team focused on like data and they're just focused on DLP and so you end up with these like silos across teams that makes it really hard to get that comprehensive view and then to also like react in a way that's comprehensive.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I feel like there's an opportunity there as well for somebody to, and perhaps it exists already, but I feel like this is a meaty enough part of cybersecurity that there ought to be some community or conference or something that kind of like looks at this, right? It's different enough than endpoint or than, you know, a lot of other things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest challenge there is going to be tearing down the silos, like that I was just talking about, right? You know, like there's so many times that I'll talk to teams that have, and it's not even just like organizational silos, it's like mental silos too. It's like, no, like just think, I know you're thinking about email right now, but let's just think more broadly, right?
I mean,
Yeah,
somewhat I think of the IT and OT side of slowly learning the same lessons painfully, and refusing to talk to each other about the lessons you've learned. That seems somewhat similar to, okay, we're going to slowly relearn every lesson of the on-prem world, but in the cloudy world instead, where kind of fundamentally we don't have the direct control that we do in the on-prem world. We just have to pray to the Google gods that they give us the logs that we require, and they will
right,
give us some of
exactly.
them.
Exactly. And then there's a lot we can learn from like the EDR space, like how to orchestrate a response, right? How to like, you know, like there's a ton, I think there's a ton of parallel lessons here that apply.
I wonder, yeah, I'm thinking of like, what are the Sigma rules for the cloud? What are the cross-platform, cross-EDR, cross-SIEM rules that we have to work with? I don't think there's really one yet.
Right. Yeah, not that I've seen, but we could just be missing it. So definitely something I'm Googling after this session.
Yeah. I feel like we're again in this age where there's a lot of lessons across the board. I know when you guys were just, you know, talking about lessons from kind of the past there, I feel like, you know, AI is in the same boat. I was just seeing a thing this morning about I think it's a post from Hidden Layer, I think, about how, hey, you know, MCP is great, but turns out you can just convince, you know, an agent to essentially read other people's session, and it's like, oh man, yeah, it's we're kind of rediscovering all these segmentation concepts, right? Of like you can't, you know, it's got to be implemented server side, it's got to be strong, you know,
That's right.
strong segmentation, all that stuff.
Speaking of MCP, just like agents in general, this is kind of a horror story I like to lay out for people, which is, you know, you look at Gemini and you look at other like services out there, they all want to be like your co-pilots now. And historically, like if you had a document lying around with payroll data in it that was shared with your entire organization, the likelihood that someone would find that document that's an employee was very low, right? Like, but now if you have an agent that's going out and like ingesting all of this data in your environment, and I sit down at my laptop and I type in what is the CEO's like, you know, salary, and it's available in a document somewhere in that environment with incorrect permissions, the agent's not necessarily going to know it shouldn't tell me what the answer is, right? And this, I'm talking about this because this all ties back into like that unified approach to like workspace security. It's data, it's posture, it's inbound threat detection. Like you just have to really take a unified approach to solve this problem in 2025.
Absolutely. On this wise wise note, thanks so much for coming in. That was super interesting. If anybody wants to chat with you, what's the best way of reaching you?
Yeah, I'll put my email address in the chat. And when this gets posted to Discord, maybe I don't want it to get posted there, but I'll put my email address there. You can find me on LinkedIn. Basically, or yeah, just where yeah, or Google me and find me somewhere on the
Yeah, I
internet.
feel like these days it's kind of a useless question.
I appreciate it.
Awesome.
I appreciate it though. So
All right. Thanks a
cool.
lot. Super interesting. And everybody else, thanks for coming in. And we will see you next week for Defender Fridays.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is great.
Sure thing. Bye.